So the Prophet ﷺ said, every good deed is multiplied by 10 to 700 times, except for fasting, for that is mine and I reward it. Man leaves his food, drink and desire for my sake. So this is a very famous Hadith Qudsi, talking about the blessing of fasting. And the scholars differed. What does this mean? That it's a bit of a strange. Why is fasting more rewarded than any other act? So any act is rewarded 10 times to 700 times, but not fasting, it's mine. Well, it's all from Allah. So why has Allah said specifically, fasting is mine? The scholars differ on what this means. Some say it talks about sincerity, because with fasting it's a lot easier to be sincere when you're fasting, because you're not doing anything. You know, when you're praying, you're doing an outward act, aren't you? So you can show off about that. When you're giving charity, you can show off, because you can show off it. You can tell people, here's my janda, it's coming. You know, everybody, was my name mentioned on the list? Excuse me. Okay, that was one mosque. They were knocking off the names, yeah, who's given. And one guy put his hand up, he says, you haven't mentioned me yet. Yeah, and the guy said, he says, your name's coming up in it's on the list. So that's one of the peculiarities of our community. So but with fasting, you can't really, you know, how do you make people know that you're fasting? Apart from they can either smell your breath, your dragon breath, or they, obviously you tell them. And there's a joke about this. This man was in his prayer all like really pious, like really putting his effort in. Two guys were like, mashallah, look at this man, look how focused he is in his prayer, what a pious man. And he turns around in the middle of his prayer and he says, I'm fasting too. You know, so there's this idea that you'd have to really put some effort in to show off about fasting, because fasting is a non-act. As I was saying previously, you can't really, you know, show it to people. So some say that's what the meaning is. The other interpretation of this is that it's as if you're taking on an attribute of God. Like I mentioned this, you know, like as if you don't have need. And so it's got a special nature with God, because it's sort of it's a proclamation of that I am doing without, just like, and taking on that quality of God in that sense. Obviously, we're not talking literally, we're talking from one aspect. And so God loves that, because you're trying to take on that quality. That's another interpretation. What's so amazing about fasting as well, it's the most practical act you can do in the day. So if you think about Ramadan, why do we fast Ramadan? Essentially, we fast Ramadan because why? Why do we fast the month of Ramadan specifically? Why is it not any other month? Because we were commanded to. Yeah, you're just meant to. Just do it. Yeah, that's one aspect. Yeah. Any other reasons? I always ask this question. I'm amazed that no one. We do it every year. Why on earth do we fast Ramadan specifically? Okay, but why Ramadan? I could do that in any month. Exactly, the Quran was revealed in this month. So this is the month in which the Quran was revealed, and so we fast in order to give thanks for that. So essentially, fasting is, for Ramadan specifically, is an expression of gratitude. And but not only that, it's because it's such a blessed month, we want to fill it with as much worship as possible. But we can't do worship all the month. That's impractical, isn't it? Because we've got to work. We've got to get on with our day. So fasting is the most practical act of worship that we can do, because we can get on with our day and we're still in a state of worship with God because we're fasting. Does that make sense? So you're occupied in your dunya, in your worldly matters, but because you're fasting, you're getting reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even when you're physically engaged in the world. Because you're fasting, you've got a connection with God. And there's some narrations of hadith that allude to this, is that the sleep of the faster is worship. Yeah, because if he's in a state of fasting, he's getting reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then what happens? We break our fast, and then so we engage in the act of, in a day we engage in the act of worship that requires least effort. You say least effort, but what I mean is you're not having to do something. And then when you break fast and the night comes in, you're engaging yourself in the most engaging act of worship. What is that? Taraweeh. You're physically with Allah, you're mentally with Allah, you're spiritually with Allah. Okay, and in these days of the year, we are there all. If you think about it, literally, we are worshipping 24 hours, because you're either working and you're either fasting, and then you are reciting Quran and praying in the mosque if if you're doing a tarawih. So most of the day we are engaged in some form of worship, and so that's why fasting's Allah knows best. This is why fasting's been chosen for the month of Ramadan, because it means that you're constantly engaged with Allah in an act of worship regardless. So we look at that from a metaphysical point of view. This is the greatest benefit of fasting in the month of Ramadan, is that we're engaged in love. So people say, well, it's not good for your health. But there's many things we do that aren't good for our health, but still need to be done for the sake of our family or so forth. Sometimes we do our health damage. We do straining jobs, and we know it's not good for our health. Why? Because there's a greater purpose. And so even if we were to say fasting is not good for the health, if we were to go with that line of thinking, but there's a greater purpose behind it. And also, as we said, it imbues you with that sense of self-control, determination. It teaches you what amazing things you can achieve. Because imagine if your young child, 13, 14, is fasting 30 days and they go and tell their non-Muslim teacher at school, they're flabbergasted. They say, how on earth can you do this? And that makes that child think, I can achieve things. And that's a really important lesson for people to learn in life, is that if they set their mind to something, they can achieve it, and even more so when they do it as a community, when they're encouraged. Think of what we could achieve as a community if we really did things as a community together. We could achieve great, great things. Yeah, and we know that in the past people used to fast to give up on the world and experience God. So this is like in line of this hadith is about the fastings for me. This is a special act of worship, God's saying, and this is why people of the past really, they exerted themselves in fasting, because they had a belief that it would connect them to God. So it's one act of worship that connects you to God, in ways unlike others. Yeah, I mentioned all those things. And we know, obviously, we try to do as much acts of worship as we can in Ramadan, because there's a hadith, it's a weak hadith, but the sound is that any act of worship done in the month of Ramadan is worth 70,000 more than outside of this. And so that's why we occupy ourselves with whatever possible acts we can do. So these are the interpretations of this hadith.